Welcome back to my channel. So for today's video, I am going to do something that I've been trying to do multiple times over the last 4 weeks, but I just could never find the words. And that was critical analysis in the context of already published literature. The topic is obviously Gilmore Girls, because that is where I want to start. But the essays on which I'm trying to refer to is a book called Gilmore Girls and a Politics of Identity, and this was a book published in 2008, so this was just after the original series ended, and it kind of explores Gilmore Girls through different contexts, whether it be through feminism, whether it be through exploring the idea of escapism and utopia. It just explores a lot of concepts which have been addressed in literature many times in the past, but it does it through the lens of a more modern show like Gilmore Girls. So the essay I've chosen is called Like Mother, Like Daughter by Stacia M. Flegel, and this essay addresses the idea of a motherhood across 3 generations. Well, really 2 generations, but the effect on the motherhood of the mother on the child. Before I really get into it, the one thing I wanted to start off with was kind of just discussing the fact that Gilmore Girls is kind of quite famous, or it's known for the fact it's quite unique in depicting the female experience in the context of single motherhood. This is something the essay actually covers, and that's the essay brings up a few times at the beginning how it's very common when there is a single mother in a TV show that they will end up reuniting with the father of that child as if that was their entire goal. And Gilmore Girls already turns that idea on its head, basically in the early episodes of the season, in 2 obvious ways. For one thing, the father of Rory Gilmore does not actually appear in the show until the 14th episode, and another way in which it's overturned is the fact that Lorelai is completely self-sufficient on her own, right up to the moment she's not. But what really intrigued me was kind of realizing that what made this show so unique as a viewer is also the crux of the show's issues and something that causes conflict between the characters. Lorelai is relatively, as I said earlier, Lorelai is relatively self-sufficient. She is accomplished. She's by no means a bad mother, but it is quite common in stereotypes to presume that people who fall pregnant at a young age are those who are going to struggle. It's a stereotype, there's stigma attached to it, and that type of thing all the time. And while Lorelai doesn't have those characteristics, there's a very clear indication in the world that she comes from, and that's a world of wealth and old money, and a world where her mother is very traditional. That is a problem. So it becomes what really drives me towards what's really interesting about the show is its conflict is the fact that the very thing that makes Gilmore Girls unique to the viewer is the very thing that drives a wedge between Lorelai and Emily, and that kind of comes across in the series over and over. But the clearest point in which it comes out is the way that Lorelai raises Rory, and this is something the essay brings out. The essay notes that a daughter's true feelings of her mother really start to show when they are raising their own child. And that's 100% true, because if you see the type of relationship Emily and Lorelai was very, I wouldn't say toxic, but I guess it even is kind of toxic to a degree. But I would say it was very turbulent. There were constant arguments about whether Lorelai could really be independent, because Emily was always raised to believe that a mother should mother her child, and to her, mothering means having control over her child's life. She presents Lorelai with a lot of opportunities, but those opportunities come with strings, in the sense that it requires Lorelai to enjoy the life that she has been brought into, but she doesn't. So it's very hard for her to hard for both of them to ever have a meet at a point which feels right to both of them, because for Emily, she can't understand why her daughter wants the freedom and all that sort of thing when she has always presumed or has internalized this belief that to be a good mother, she has to be the mother that has all the control. And I think there's a really good quote in a book called Handle with Care by Jodie Picoult. There was a question raised by one of the mothers in the book. She said, "What's the difference between someone who's trying to be a good mom and an actual good mom," or something along those lines? And the person responded, "Someone who tries to be a good mom is someone who follows their daughter around. Someone who is actually a good mom is when the daughter wants to follow in her footsteps." And I think that's kind of a great summary of the show, to be honest. It kind of actually fits into Lorelai and Rory's relationship. But in terms of Emily and Lorelai, it's very hard for both of them to reconcile, I guess, what they believe is meant to be good motherhood with the relationship that they have. Because Lorelai wants freedom, but that's not something that her mum's ever going to offer her, because that doesn't seem like good mothering. And then Emily wants to have a relationship with Lorelai, but Lorelai doesn't want to listen to her, and to her that's a failure on Lorelai's part, not Emily's, because Emily's doing everything she can to communicate with Lorelai, and give opportunity, communicate in the sense that she gives all the opportunities to Lorelai, but Lorelai rejects them by only wanting independence and wanting to leave that world which Emily has grown up in, and the only world Emily ever knew. A reason that conflict is so important to note is because that conflict is kind of what drives a very different relationship between Lorelai and Rory. And one thing I wanted to say before I kind of went into detail about that was, when I initially watched the show, I kind of saw an idealized version of Lorelai and Rory, and that's because my own relationship with my mom it's not bad. It's just very unlike Lorelai and Rory. It's not about friendship first, motherhood second. It's not about telling them everything, stuff like that. There are just always boundaries between a mother and a child for me. Like that's the type of what I've grown up in, and I think there was always going to be a variety of worlds in which people grow up in, and I think it's actually going to affect your view of the show. But for me, that was one of my things. I really thought, I really idealized their relationship. And then the more I watched it, and then particularly when the revival came out, I kind of just hit a milestone where I was like, just because this relationship isn't like me, no, just because the relationship isn't like me doesn't mean it's not without flaws. I know the flaws in my own relationship with my mom because I live it. I know the flaws, I know the pros, the cons. Like, when you live a certain life, you obviously are aware of both sides of it. When you see someone else's life as a bystander, you only see things through rose-colored glasses. And the one thing the revival challenged me to do was it challenged me to strip that sense of bias and actually view them as a relationship without the context of my own life. And as a result of that, it kind of started to hit me that while Lorelai and Rory's relationship is very interesting, they were never designed to be perfect. They were just a depiction of a relationship that exists in the way it does because of how Emily raised Lorelai, or how Lorelai raised herself after she left Emily. And that's honestly like the crux of this essay. And I guess to further that idea that Lorelai and Rory's relationship is a direct result of Emily and Lorelai's relationship, I said earlier that the essay made a point that one's true view of their mother really shines through when they themselves become a mother. But I kind of extended that to think, just because you can avoid making the same mistakes, if that is the case for you, that you had with your relationship with your mother, you risk making different ones. And that's something that I guess that's something that I guess Jodie Picoult's book doesn't really quantify, because Jodie Picot's book kind of talks about a good mother is someone whose child actually wants to follow her. And there's a quote in Gilmore Girls where Rory is doing her valedictorian speech, and she says, I don't think my mother ever knew that the person I most wanted to be was her. And at the time, when you watch that scene, that is one of like those sentimental scenes that honestly tugs at heartstrings, because it's a high school graduation, so obviously your heart is like invested in it. And the other thing is obviously it's really emotional, and at that point Lorelai cannot see the bad in that comment. It seems like the most perfect, I'm gonna say it guys, full circle in the world. But what doesn't become apparent until season 5, season 6, and the revival is the fact that Rory wanting to follow her mother's footsteps doesn't necessarily mean that things are going to turn out well. And that's not me saying that things that go wrong in Rory's life are Lorelai's fault. I guess what I'm trying to say is, even if you quantify someone as a good mother, the child still has potential to make mistakes, because I guess that's what life is. And obviously that's realistic, but that's something that I don't need to tell you. What I did need to kind of make clear was the fact that the relationship that Lorelai opts to have with Rory creates challenges for her when Rory acted out in college. Because when Rory is in college, she doesn't feel like she needs to be controlled or told what to do, because she's not living at home, and her mother never told her what to do, even when she was in high school. So Lorelai has this she's constantly finding this ground where this relationship with Rory has genuinely always been good for her. Like, she's loved getting to know her, finding about all the milestones in her daughter's life. But by putting that relationship first, she loses a lot of ground when it comes to stepping up. And she does step up. Lorelai does her absolute best to step up, but she's put herself like a million miles behind the start line just by opting that relationship. And one great example of that is probably when Rory and Dean sleep together, because Rory wants to make a joke out of it, kind of just keep it lighthearted, Trojan jokes, all that type of thing. And Lorelai shakes Rory back to reality, reminds her that she messed up big time. And the first thing Rory does is run. She avoids Lorelai for an entire episode, runs off to Europe, apologizes when she's realized what's the situation, and addressed it in her own mind. But she was unable to, or incapable of, hearing her mother out until she understood it herself. And that's probably like one of the biggest flaws about Rory. Rory's not being good at being called out. She's only good at being called out when she's already seen when she sees the problem. Before she sees the problem, Lorelai and Rory are an absolute crossroads, because Lorelai can't get through to her because she's always put this friendship before motherhood, and therefore she has very minimal ground to stay on when she tries to make a point. And Rory's too busy in whatever emotional world she is in, to acknowledge it. And from habit, she doesn't think she needs to, because it's Lorelai, and Lorelai's never been angry at her, and the only time she is probably because she's being unreasonable, because Lorelai has made like a dozen mistakes which do make her look like a teenager, but she's also made tons of good choices which indicate she is the mother in the relationship. And I guess the other issue, which I haven't quite covered yet, is the fact that Lorelai has internalized some of the words that Emily says, and Rory is aware of that. In season 1, episode 9, which was Rory's dance, Rory and Dean fall asleep in a dance studio in Stars Hollow, and they obviously completely miss curfew. And in typical dramatic style, this is one of the only episodes in which Emily is around to see Lorelai fail. She didn't actually, but the night before that happened, Lorelai and Emily were tentatively getting along. There was a tender moment where Emily got to feel like the mother that she wanted to be, because Lorelai really needed her because she screwed up her back. And Lorelai got to feel like she didn't fail in her mother's eyes, because Emily actually admits that Lorelai has done a great job with Rory. But Rory not coming back home completely ruins that mood. Suddenly the main issue with that arises between Emily and Lorelai comes back up again. And the main issue between them is the fact that Lorelai left when she was 16 and didn't tell anyone except via a note. She left that life behind, and to Emily, she rejected everything that Emily ever stood for. And when they argue about it, this whole notion of failure re-arises, because something that came up in the very early episodes of the series is that Lorelai sees the world she's built. Emily sees the world that Lorelai could have built with her help, and only sees the things she has done as a fraction of what she was capable of. And that issue re-arises when Rory doesn't come home, because when Rory doesn't come home, Emily pretty much snaps at her, and Lorelai says the following. She says, "This is a life. It may have a little colour in it, which is probably why it looks unfamiliar to you, but this is a life." And there's some stuff I want to talk about that in terms of Stars Hollow versus Heartwood in terms of colour, but I think I'm just going to save that for later. And while Lorelai is right, when Rory does eventually go home, Lorelai snaps at her. But here's the thing. Rory is aware that the reason Lorelai is so wired up is because Emily called her out on something that Lorelai has Emily has called Lorelai out on her abilities as a mother. And while it doesn't take the sting away from the words she says, it reignites a massive issue which recurs throughout the series, and that's the fact that because Rory knows Lorelai that well as a friend, as a human being, and not just as a mother, she can very easily or instinctively write off the things Lorelai says as not being about her. So she forgets to hold herself accountable, and she forgets to hold herself accountable when she is accountable. In this case, she's accountable, but not in the way that Lorelai blames her for, so that's fine. But as Rory actually does end up making mistakes in the course of the series, it becomes increasingly obvious that while Rory and Lorelai's relationship is very, very different and looks healthier than Lorelai and Emily's, the myriad of problems that it raises is indisputable. There's only one other thing I'm going to address, and that's just the topic of the life that Lorelai chose versus the life Lorelai could have had, and then also how that affects Rory. I'm going to start this with my talking about can't remember what episode it is. It's the one where I think it's season 2, episode 6 or 7, Like Mother, Like Daughter, and this is the episode where Lorelai gets called out by children for not participating in any events, so she joins the Booster Club and basically puts on a freaking fabulous event. And the night's going well, Emily and Lorelai are getting along, they're having a great time, and then Emily says this: "It's funny how easily you fit into the world that you tried so hard to get away from." And this is actually something I've actually asked someone, because I can't decide if this was manipulative on Emily's part, or was it Lorelai's biases getting in the way of her taking a compliment, or was it just an innocent observation on Emily's part, which Lorelai just turned into something more. Part of me doesn't trust Emily as far as I could throw her. Like, she's a witty character, she's hilarious, but god dang it, she is absolutely manipulative. On the other hand, Emily doesn't always have bad intentions. She makes bad decisions, she's controlling, she's meddlesome and all those things. But I don't think she's intentionally trying to screw up Lorelai. I think her values and the world that she lives in has always defined the things she says first, and trying to reconcile that with a daughter who doesn't agree with her is very difficult for her. So that comment is a very hard comment to analyze, because it's a comment that the essay actually notes this as an indication of Emily's manipulation, that she'll probably that Emily will build Lorelai up to a point only to ruin her by bringing up such a comment once more. But I don't disagree with it, because the look on Emily's face, smiling as Lorelai's smile drops, is one of the most jarring things ever. But I also think the situation is a lot more nuanced than that. I think for Lorelai, it's kind of just a constant reminder, and I think Lorelai has a history of just internalizing everything she's ever been through and internalizing all the hurt she's experienced, that even if Emily did mean it innocently, she was going to take it the wrong way. And maybe a part of Emily knew that, but I think it's probably both things. I think Emily was being slightly manipulative. Whether it was on purpose, I'm not sure, but I think she was being manipulative because that is basically in her genes. But I also think Lorelai has a real issue of internalizing things and holding on to many scars, which probably affected how she would take those words, regardless of Emily's intentions, even if they were innocent. But the thing is, did Lorelai have a point in her internalized fears? Because the internalized fear is not just that Lorelai fits into a world that she hates. It's the fact that Rory could end up fitting into that world, and that's not something that's addressed in that episode, but it's something that's kind of foreshadowed in this scene, because Lorelai's face drops when she realizes she can easily seep into a world even though she despises it. But then as the episodes go on and Rory distances herself from Lorelai because she's going to college and she's not living at home, and Rory's expanded her worldview to include people like Logan Huntsberger and Colin and Finn, who are part of this Life and Death Brigade, who are part of this crazy fraternity, secret society thing that represents hedonism and privilege and crazy stunts. As Rory kind of builds herself into that world, it becomes increasingly obvious that Rory actually fits into that world. The one thing that Lorelai chose to do that Emily never really gave Lorelai a chance to do was the right to choose. But I don't think Lorelai ever wondered what would happen if Rory ends up enjoying the life that she hated so much. What if giving her the autonomy to make that choice would lead to Lorelai having to deal with the fact that Rory finds that extravagant world exciting, and she finds it worth living, and she doesn't just find it superficial and pointless. A good example of this is probably in season 5, episode 13, and this is the night before the wedding, and Lorelai is basically talking about privileged people and how she compares it to the Life and Death Brigade, and Rory immediately goes on defensive, and Laura doesn't quite pick up on it yet, but she hasn't quite figured out that for the first time in Rory's life, she took a massive risk, and that risk was jumping off a freaking building with an umbrella in her hand with Logan Huntsberger. Like, until season 5, Rory was not a risk taker. She probably take minimal risk, but she didn't understand how to take risk, and she was finally discovering that side of herself. But that side of herself was attached to this world that Lorelai found ridiculous, and as a result, I think tensions were already starting to arise to them, even before they had their massive fight and just didn't talk for 6 months. Even before that, there was already like tension in the fact that their values were kind of diverging, and Rory was battling going through college while also enjoying a extravagant life that Lorelai's always criticised, whereas Lorelai still thinks that Rory is the person that she was when she was at Chilton. Because Rory's never seen the bad of money up to a point. Up to season 6, Rory had never seen the bad side of money. She lived in a freaking potting shed when she was like, until she was like 3, so money obviously would have helped that situation. Money is the reason she could go to Chilton. Money doesn't seem like a big deal when all she had to do was hang with the grandparents. Money is something that got the termites out of their house. And Lorelai likely never told her that Emily tried to manipulate her after all that. To Rory, money never came with strings. And then in season 5, it's not just about the money anymore, it's about the privilege and the ability to take risks without the consequences. And that's something that Rory's not used to. That's something that Rory becomes accustomed to. And as a result of that, you can kind of see just them diverging in their understanding of the value of money, their understanding of privilege, their understanding of what it means to take risks and stuff like that. And their relationship kind of deteriorates, even if it's just in the slightest ways. You can just feel it deteriorating. And I think another good example of this is actually Rory's birthday, because while I know they were in the middle of their fight, you could kind of see that Lorelai wanted to reconcile with Rory. But when they had that conversation at the end of that episode, I was completely taken aback by how little they had in common. Because they were both genuinely trying, but they were stuck in a place where neither knew what to say to each other. And I think that's an issue that probably arose from how Rory was raised. It seems to be a massive conflict in that Lorelai is proud that Rory wants to turn out like her, but Lorelai is also scared that Rory would turn up like her because Emily has scared the shit out of her in the past about how much Lorelai has failed. And then, even if those aren't the issues, Lorelai is probably scared. Even if she doesn't turn out like, even if she doesn't turn out like her, what if the world she chooses is a world that Lorelai would have rejected? There seems to be a constant issue of who Lorelai. There seems to be a constant conflict of internally, and I don't think this is like as prevalent as I'm making it sound if you watch episodes just one time. But I think the more I've watched it, the more I've kind of just got this idea that I think the story is not just about how Rory turns out and how Emily turns out and how Lorelai turns out. I think it has been about Lorelai addressing internal demons, whether it comes to her past, her relationship with Emily, B, to her relationship with Rory in terms of giving her autonomy to have the choices, to make the choices she needs to, and C, addressing the demons that come with that in terms of whether Lorelai feels like she's losing a part of Rory in her decisions that she makes. That was really jumbled, and I had some points that were coming to my mind as I was talking, but I was just running out of ways to express it. But yeah, I will catch you guys next time. Bye.